It's the Farmer to Farmer podcast, episode 167, and this is your host, Chris Blanchard. And before we get started today, I want to say how happy I am to be back and how grateful I am for all of the support and all of the love that everybody out there gave me during my illness and my ongoing recuperation. It means the world to me, and it's been the source of so much comfort and peace for me as I took the time to heal. I know that all of you farmers out there know just how hard it was to make the decision to take that first week off, and even while I was in the hospital, and even harder to make the additional time that I needed to really get myself to the point where I can put out consistent content again. Thank you so much for your patience and your love and your support while I and those around me put me back together again. Love you all. My guests today, Genesis McKiernan-Allen and Eli Robb, raise vegetables year-round at Full Hand Farm, 45 minutes northeast of Indianapolis. Going into year 7 of their operation, Genesis and Eli have between 4 and 5 acres of produce production, with half of their sales going to farmers market and the other half going to restaurants in Indianapolis. Eli and Genesis dig into how they've managed a black rot infestation in their brassica crops, as well as how they've weathered an herbicide drift incident by marketing with honesty and integrity. And we take a deep look at the details of the winter production in their operation, including the highs and the lows of mobile tunnels, their design for caterpillar tunnels and how those fit into their rotation, and how 4-season production has fit into their business and marketing plans. We also take an honest evaluation of starting a farm where the food scene was not fully developed and how that's worked for them. And we take a similarly honest look at starting a family on the farm and how they've made that work. The Farmer to Farmer podcast is generously supported by Vermont Compost Company, founded by organic crop growing professionals committed to meeting the need for high quality compost and compost-based living soil mixes for certified organic plant production. VermontCompost.com. And by Haas Tools. And Haas Tools is the complete solution for all your market farming tools and supplies. From wheel hose, precision seeders, heavy-duty seed trays, drip irrigation, and organic pest control, they've got you covered. Get free shipping and outstanding customer service at HaasTools.com. And by Local Food Marketplace, helping farms and food hubs around North America implement easy-to-use online ordering systems that integrate with a full management system for order packing, invoicing, and payment processing. Contact localfoodmarketplace.com to learn more. Genesis McKiernan-Allen and Eli Robb, welcome to the Farmer to Farmer podcast.
Hey, Chris, thanks. We're happy to be here.
Hey, Chris, thanks for having us.
So glad you could join us today. I'd like to start off by having you tell us about Full Hand Farm. Where are you guys located? How much are you farming? And where are you guys selling your produce and how are you selling it?
Sure. We're in Indiana. We are about 45 minutes northeast of downtown Indianapolis, right on a county line, and we are pretty much serving Indianapolis with our produce. That's where it's all going. We grow about between 4 and 5 acres of vegetables, kind of when you count in all the double cropping and the rotations and things like that. And we do grow year round. We're selling to restaurants and farmers markets. Those are our 2 avenues. It's about 50-50 split between those 2. We do a pretty high volume summer market, one at this point. And then we also do a winter farmers market all year. So we're at market maybe, I don't know, I would say 45 to 48 weeks out of the year. We do take a few off just for our sanity. And then restaurant sales is about the other 50% of our revenue. And that's going to about, 15 to 20 restaurants in Indianapolis weekly from usually May until just after Christmas is how long we're offering restaurant deliveries. I think that covers the bases. So
Indianapolis and Indiana in general, I don't tend to think of as local food hotspots. But when you're talking about selling to 20 restaurants, there's clearly some stuff going on there.
Yeah, there definitely is. I mean, I think Indianapolis is in the last, really since we've been farming, but especially in the last 5 years, there's been a real, I would say, cultural renaissance in Indianapolis itself, as far as people being really excited about the city, investing in the city, kind of arts and culture, and all kinds of people putting in a lot of sort of creative energy into the city that didn't necessarily exist there in the 80s and 90s when we were growing up. And food is definitely a big part of that. The chef scene in Indianapolis is pretty wonderful. It's a lot of young chefs who are really invested in the city and have just been able to really, I think, carve out a niche in Indianapolis as a place for really creative, not necessarily only fine dining, but just creative dining that is chef owned and operated. And it's just a really thriving food culture right now. And our farm really started right when the restaurant scene was really starting to take off. So we feel pretty lucky that we moved back when we did and started our farm when we did, because I think we were really able to kind of rise with the culinary scene, kind of along with it. And I think the growth of our farm has really, it's been in coordination with the growth of the restaurant scene in Indianapolis, which has been really fun. It's been really cool.
When did you guys start farming?
So we're going into year 7 of Full Hand Farm on our own. We did do 2 years of an apprenticeship on a really wonderful CSA farm in north central Iowa. So our first year, so we were in Portland, Oregon before that for about 8 years, and we moved to Iowa, I think in 2010. We did 2010 and 2011 as apprentices on a CSA farm in really rural north central Iowa. And then we moved home to Indiana in 2012, late 2011, put up a couple hoop houses, and started selling in 2012 in Indy. And we've been here ever since. Are
you still on the same land that you started farming on?
We are not. So we actually came home to Indiana at the encouragement of, for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons was because Eli's dad had just bought about 10 acres just outside of the city and offered us, an acre or two to get started on if we were really serious about doing our own thing. And so when we moved back, that was kind of what we knew we had. We were like, okay, we have an acre or two about 30 minutes outside of the city, and we know we can get started there, and we'll kind of figure out the rest of the pieces later. And so we did that for 2 years. So 2012 and 2013, we were farming 1 acre the first year, 2 acres the second year on Eli's dad's property. And then it was in that 2013 year that we found our current property via Craigslist, of all places.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's kind of a bizarre story. But yeah, so we found our current place and leased it with an intent to purchase. And so then we moved to our current property and leased for, do you remember? I want to say 2 years. Basically until we got pregnant and we're like, oh, guess we better buy this place or figure out how to hurry up and get this property locked in. So then we started, I guess our first year at our current property was 2014. So we've been now on this ground 14, 15, 16, 17. So this will be our 5th year on this ground. And we have purchased this property. We did buy this property with the help of an FSA, Beginning Farmer 50/50 loan.
You guys are farming 4 to 5 acres of vegetables. How much land do you guys actually own?
We have about 25 acres here, just under. It's a little rolling, which helped to make it affordable. And so really there's maybe 7 acres flat tillable that's opened up. And we like to try and set aside at least a third of that to rest. We did actually just take over a neighbor's 5-acre cornfield down the road. He's got 5 acres of kind of sandy bottomland right along a creek. And he was wanting to get that out of corn. And so we took that over, which will let us expand a little bit and allow us to really open up our rotation.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that just really quickly to talk about the rotation, because 5 years here, one of the things that we're learning, being a beginning farmer, I feel like never ends, or it feels like it's never going to end. Because now that we've been on the same ground, 4 or 5 years, like pests and insects, disease, we got hit with some disease a couple years ago. We got black rot of crucifers that wiped out a lot of our fall brassicas, which, as you know, is it's like 50% of the crops that we grow, especially in the fall. And so we weren't really interested in scaling our operation per se, but we were really interested in trying to open up some opportunity for rotation to figure out how to better manage disease and pests.
When you say black rot, that's something that sticks around for quite some time in the soil, doesn't it?
Yep.
Yeah, they say 3 years. 3 years, you need to have a clean field of 3. Yeah, so it's basically as long as the residue is in the field, that black rot can hang on to it, and it spreads so quickly. So our goal now is to stay out of those fields that had any sign of black rot for 3 years, which is a tall order.
Yeah, when you say stay out of those fields, are you talking about just staying out with brassicas, or are you talking about staying out with tractors?
Just staying out with brassicas.
Okay.
And then, you did mention equipment, and that is something the last few years that I've been really careful of. When I go in those fields with any equipment, when I come out, there's a special spot at the far end of the farm where I pressure wash the equipment off, and I have a backpack sprayer that I have a bleach solution in and sanitize things before I move to other fields.
What a pain in the ass.
Yeah, big time. But more of a pain in the ass to not have a storage crop of cabbage.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
How did you guys diagnose the black rot? Like, what was it that happened? And then what did you do for control that year?
So it moved in on our spring brassicas, and we started noticing some symptoms. And that's kind of like, the season's crazy. We'll just keep moving forward. Oh, wait, the cabbage is melting. And so then we sent off a sample to Purdue, our university up here, and they diagnosed it for us. Meanwhile, we had already put in our fall brassicas, and that disease had moved around, whether it was the dog or the flea beetles or what moved it around.
Or our boots. And our pant legs. It spreads really easily on water molecules. And so, I honestly think our dog was the one that, did the initial spreading around of she's just out there hunting around, in and out of fields. She's a good farm dog, keeping rabbits away. But I think, going through those plants early in the morning when they're dewy and wet, and then going to a new field, when they're dewy and wet. And I'm pretty sure that's how it got spread so broadly, so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is we just didn't know what we were looking for. Right? Like this was, I think, year 4 for us, maybe that we got the black rot. And so there's so much other stuff going on. There's so much other stuff that we're trying to handle. Our son was maybe a year and a half that year. So we're learning how to juggle, having a small child. I wasn't on the farm as much. We had employees. It's easy when those symptoms show up. I think when you're early in your farming career and you haven't yet had a catastrophic event like that, to just think, oh, it'll pull through, or, oh, I'm like too tired to look it up or find out, until it was too late. And it really was a devastating loss for us. But taught some good lessons too, right? Now I think that really launched us into sort of identifying disease issues, being better about scouting, building relationships with the plant pathologist at Purdue and the vegetable specialist at Purdue, and sort of building relationships with people that I can now ping a text message or an email to and say, hey, what does this look like? Should I be concerned, basically?
When you say something like getting better at scouting, what does that actually look like?
That's a good question, which we're still getting better at. We're, trying to carve out a specific time in the week for a field walk, which actually ties into, we have a full-time year-round employee that's been with us for
3 years.
3 years, I think. Yeah. And just trying to tie her into the bigger picture, and then just trying to pay attention to what we're seeing when we're out there harvesting, and not kind of discounting it.
Which led into, last year, we had black rot a couple years ago. There are we've had a lot of success farming. I feel like all of a sudden we're just like talking about the bad stuff, but it's sometimes that's what maybe you learn the most from, or the most quickly.
I think that's it, right? The most quickly. It's not necessarily the most from, but boy, those lessons tend to come fast and hard.
Yeah, exactly. But so part of that scouting, I would say that from the black rot this past year, 2017, we did end up having an incident where Eli was out on a Sunday doing a field walk, changing out some irrigation, checking stuff out. Started to notice some funny spots all over everything in our first, maybe like 1.5 acres, 2 acres of production up. It's on a road that's across the field from across the road from a conventional farm. And he kind of checked it out. It was really bizarre. There were spots on across crop families and everything from, carrots that had just put their first true leaves on to, the kale and chard that had been in for 6 weeks and was just getting ready to bunch. And turns out that we had been drifted. We had herbicide drift that had come across the road. From the conventional field across the way. But so he did notice that really early, and we were able to jump on that really quickly, get the state chemist called, get somebody out very quickly to take samples and check it out and to start to move forward, right? Start to figure out like, okay, here's our problem. Instead of just wondering what's the problem? Why is this stuff? Why are we having failure to thrive? Being like, okay, this is it. Now, how do we move forward? What do we do now?
Okay. So, not to dwell on all of the bad stuff, black rot and herbicide drift, but okay. So you discover that you got herbicide drift. what next? What do you do about that?
You make sure that the tequila bottle's relatively full.
Especially because I will jump in and say that our daughter was 3 weeks old when this happened. We had a 3-week-old baby as well. So Keep that. I mean, nothing like early June, a 3-week-old baby and drift.
I can only, having done the 3-week-old baby thing, and although not in the middle of the summer, that's pretty hardcore.
It's pretty talented. No, it's pretty talented is what I'll say. Anyway, yeah.
It's making my stomach twist up. Think about that. So what did you do? You guys called the state, you said the state chemist.
Yeah. So, I mean, first thing I did was, so we live in a corn and bean producing state. I think you lived in Iowa for a long time, so you know how it is. I mean, it's all over the place. That's kind of the culture, right?
Right.
And so first thing I did was I knew whose field it was. I knew the family, or I knew the name of the people who owned the field. We've only been in the neighborhood for 5 years, and I always say we don't go to church or the bar. So how do we meet anybody? Because we're just working all the time.
Right.
So I didn't have a relationship with these guys. So I Googled around, found some phone numbers, called, left some messages, and no call back within 24 hours. I figured had to protect ourselves and called the state chemist, which is really the only recourse in this state. You call the state chemist, they come out, they take samples sort of in a gradient back from the field where the suspected drift came from. So they can for sure identify that the drift came from there, right? The samples will be higher, closer to the field. And then they also take samples. I think he took it off of a sycamore tree leaf a little ways back to find out kind of a scary term.
Acceptable atmospheric levels.
Yeah, that's what it was. Acceptable atmospheric levels. So apparently there's this stuff's just floating around everywhere. So he came out, took samples, and then told us, well, it could be, 6 weeks before you hear anything from us. And, 6 weeks is, life or death in some of these crops. And so, we sent samples out ourselves because this was our early spring block, all the radish and turnip and bunch greens and actually our garlic and onions. And it was a big, it was a mixed bag up there that got drifted. And we didn't know what it was, if it was safe to consume or not, so we shut restaurants off, to kind of told them what happened. And didn't harvest any of that stuff for market. Meanwhile, had sent it off to a lab, I think out in Oregon. It's really pricey. I mean, testing for this stuff is pricey. These chemical companies that produce these sprays hold on to those compositions pretty tightly, and you have to have the compositions to be able to test for it. Anyway, so we sent out to test for a couple things to see, if it was safe for consumption. And it ended up coming back safe for consumption, but well above organic standards. And so...
Which we are not certified organic. And so then we had a real moral dilemma, right? We are organic practices. We're a sustainable farm. But we're not certified. And so if we were certified, it would have been like cut and dry, like, no, we can't sell any of these crops, but we're not certified.
What do you do?
Oh man, we had heartache about it for weeks. And what we ended up deciding to do was to just fully disclose it. We were below the EPA standards for consumption, but we were about midway through, but above the organic standards for consumption. And so we ended up deciding to just fully disclose. I put it on my Instagram. We put it on our Facebook page. We printed off big signs and took them to market that showed a graph actually of EPA standard for consumption, organic standard for consumption, and then the bar in the middle that showed the level of contamination that was on our crops. And we fully outlined what crops were affected at our stand, and we posted it at our stand and kind of let people make the choice for themselves as far as if they were comfortable buying that, because you just don't know, if people are having health issues, they might be needing to be really, really strict about what contaminants that we were dealing with. But some people, maybe it's just like, oh, it's just a preference. And so they are willing to, they figure they're getting it other places. So we just opted for full disclosure and decided to just let our customers decide for themselves.
What kind of an impact did that have on sales? I mean, I'm thinking about my experience at farmers market in Rochester, Minnesota, where I would hear every week people walking through the farmers market with 80 vendors saying, oh, everybody here is organic. And of course, there were two of us that were certified organic at the market. So, I mean, with those kinds of biases there, I mean, I'm sure that lots of people at the market have much higher pesticide residues on their product than you guys do and aren't advertising it. But there's all those underlying assumptions that customers had. What kind of an impact did that have on your sales?
You know, I don't think it had too much of a negative impact. I think I remember 2 customers saying, you know, thanks for disclosing that, and walking away. Mostly it was very positive feedback. They really appreciated our kind of forthcomingness with it. And, you know, and maybe it did kind of open some minds up to what you're talking about, how there is the assumption that maybe everybody at market is organic. And that could put some question in their mind about that. It didn't necessarily. So, yeah, I don't think it really had negative impacts of sales at market.
I would actually say that I don't think it had negative impacts of sales at market because that there was, herbicide residue on our crops. I think that it could have potentially had negative sales, though, because we lost our first planting of carrots. We lost our first planting of beets. Our bunching greens struggled for the whole season. And so we missed some of that first to market share that you strive for in the spring to kind of be, early with the big piles of carrots and beets to set people's buying habits. So really, I don't think it had negative sales effects in the concern for the pesticide, but I do think that we lost a market share in the season far as our piles being quite a bit smaller. We really struggled to get, healthy, vigorous crops, replace the bunching greens and the onions, the yield loss on the onions and the garlic and the peppers and all that kind of stuff. I will say, the silver lining of that, and this is like, you always want to have something positive to tell people at market too, right? Because you don't want to be like, oh, my life is so hard, even though your life is so hard, or it feels so hard. But, you tell people, hey, this is why we're a diverse farm. This is why we don't grow only one thing. Like, this is what, we plant things every single week. Yes, this is a bummer, but, we'll come through it, and it's teaching us some lessons, and we'll figure out how to bounce back, and thanks for bearing with us.
Did you guys make any changes or do anything differently as a result of the drift incident?
Actually, when I came home that Sunday and stopped by the front field, changed up some irrigation, in the back of my truck was about 30 spruce trees to be planted as a windbreak right there on that road. Of course, 15 years too late. So that's something for sure, is getting that windbreak up as soon as possible, because it's not like these guys maliciously are doing it. It's how they've been raised. It's how they know how to raise corn and beans. That's how they've been taught, and that's the only way they know. As far as what else we've changed, I'm not sure. We should probably put some signs up. Of course, my wife was right. Genesis was right. When we moved in, she wanted to put signs up, and I thought, let's not be the crazy hippies on the corner and put everybody off right up front. But we probably should have. We're registered with a Drift Watch. It's a website that is supposed to facilitate communication between specialty crop producers and commodity crop producers, so they kind of know, so the applicators know where you are. But we didn't have signs up. Not that it should matter, but
but it does. The reality is if you drift a little bit of herbicide on your neighbor's herbicide resistant corn crop, it doesn't really matter,
Sure.
And so I think but it is such a hard line to walk between, we're the new hippies on the block and everybody's expecting you to have Naked Friday on the farm. And if you're, and if you put up the signs, you're just going to increase traffic on Fridays that way. But you also, there is a need to kind of to say it too. We're here, and please, please be considerate of what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. There is. And I will just a couple more things on this drift thing. We can move on. But, one more thing that we did right after it happened, called state chemists, figured out about, getting it identified, was start new transplants immediately, reseed, and just try and move forward. this hadn't happened to us before, but it's fairly commonplace in this state, sadly enough. And so we had known some people that it happened to, and we know that, things can move slowly. And meanwhile, the bills don't stop coming. And so we, first thing you do is move forward, replant, reseed, get new transplants coming.
Will you guys be thinking about becoming certified organic so that you have some sort of recourse in the future, some sort of official standing?
Yeah, I don't know necessarily for that recourse. I guess I hadn't thought about it like that. I mean, we have thought about it just as far as marketing ourselves better, and also just being counted. We get that ag census every year, and if we're not certified, then we're not counted as organic. And so then our little number doesn't count when the USDA looks at the overall picture of nationwide agriculture. So we've been talking about maybe feeling a little responsibility to that bigger picture to add that certification.
Let's swing and talk about some successes now, because I think that'll be a lot more fun. You guys are doing 4-season production on your farm. Can you tell me a little bit more about the systems that you're using to do that? So
we have about half an acre under plastic, and let's see how many square foot. We do a lot of movable hoop houses. We started exclusively with movables. We now have a permanent greenhouse, and then another bigger permanent 30 by 96. But then we have 4 20 by 50 movables and 3 12 by 100 cat tunnels that I made that we also move.
That was the goal from the beginning, from starting our farm. We knew that we were going to be a 4-season. That was part of our business plan, kind of our strategy going into farming. Like when we decided that this is something that we wanted to do as our living, we knew from the very beginning that we were going to need, that year-round production and that year-round income. And so we really started the farm, as part of our starting tool set that year one we hit the ground with was 2 of these 20 by 48 movable tunnels. I mean, it's something that was from the very beginning was our goal. I just wanted to say that.
And when you talk about movable tunnels, are these the ones that slide back and forth kind of on that what I think of as the Elliott Coleman model?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, these ones they're kind of the cheapy models. They're not on tracks. They're just on skids on a 2x2 square tubing.
And how do you guys have that rotation set up?
Yeah, so we have 3 slots
per tunnel.
Yeah, for each hoop house, and 2 moves a year. And so it's basically, a summer crop and a winter crop.
And a cover crop.
And a cover crop. So
is
then
the third slot.
Okay.
Sorry. Go ahead. Carry on.
Yeah, so that third slot then rests for a year for us. This ground that we're on, it was a horse farm for about 10 years before we got it. And so that's a big boost over just getting a cornfield. But it was farmed corn and beans for decades before that. And it is kind of rolly. So a lot of the topsoil is, down at the bottoms. And we're farming the tops. So the organic matter is low. And, when you're starting a farm, you don't have a huge financial pool to pull from. So cover crop in that third slot for a year is kind of a cheaper way to bump the organic matter. And it stretches out our rotation, right? So tomato, I think it's 5 years before the same crop is back on the same slot.
That's a nice.
Oh, it's a big one. And I mean, we went that direction. Genesis mentioned that we worked on a farm in Iowa for a couple years, north central Iowa. And so we were visiting farms in, Wisconsin, Minnesota, going to the Moses Conference, talking to some older time growers, growers who've been growing for a while in permanent houses, and hearing about the problems that develop. That was kind of the impetus for just going movable from the start to try and forego running into those problems.
That being said, about the movable tunnels, so those are 20 by 48. They're single layer of plastic. We're limited on the crops that we can grow in those. So in the last couple of years, we have added bigger permanent houses. Actually, two of them, one that we're kind of splitting as a prop house, but then we are doing some deep winter production in it. It's our only heated house. And then we actually got 2 EQIP grants last year. And so we put up one 30 by 96 with a double layer of poly, I guess last November, and we need to put another one up this year. So that being said, we're kind of, in order to maximize our winter production, the movables are really great for the rotation in the summer and, kind of keeping the soils flushed of salts and, keeping a nice rotation in there. But they really don't afford us the kind of growing environment that we need for the crop variety to meet the demand of the deep winter farmers market in our climate. And so we are kind of looking at a hybrid. So we are sort of using both styles of hoop houses now. The bigger double poly inflated roof to do our less cold hardy crops, lettuces, radishes, turnips, and the movable tunnels, which are great for, the rotation, but also your more cold hardy crops, kale and spinach, et cetera.
And when you talk about the production limitations of those movable high tunnels, that's really what you're talking about, is the fact that it's a single layer tunnel, that they're smaller and therefore a little bit more susceptible to the cold.
Exactly.
How cold does it get down around Indianapolis in the year? I mean, I know it's not, you talk about north central Iowa is pretty much the same as south central Minnesota. And Indiana's quite a bit different than that, but how different?
Indiana's kind of a long state. And so we have a lot, the bottom half of the state touches Kentucky and the top half of the state touches Michigan. So we have a wide range within our state. I think they moved us to a 6A for a second, but I think we're back into a 5 zone here, 5B. This winter we saw -14, -15, something like that for our lowest low that we saw, but then the climate's doing weird things.
That's not dependable. It's not dependable that we get down that low every winter. It seems like in our experience, it's sort of every 3 or 4 winters we'll see those really extreme lows, and then in between it can be really mild. So it's a little bit of a gamble. It feels like it's a little bit of a gamble on what kind of weather we'll get.
Hard to plan for.
Yeah, you just plan for the worst, and when it doesn't come, then the stuff thrives.
With the mobile high tunnels, then tell me a little bit more about how the rotation actually goes throughout the course of a year.
I guess we could start right now and then kind of come back around into winter.
And right now being about the 3rd week of March.
Sure.
Just for
right now.
Benchmark that, because we're not going to publish this tomorrow. So I just want to say that for the listening audience.
Yeah, we're right at the end of March, going into April. Springtime is here-ish, right around the corner. So when you bring crops through the winter, a lot of crops want to go to seed when it starts to warm up. You get these big temperature fluctuations between your cool nights, and the sun comes out during the day and warms up. So your Asian greens are all going to bolt. Any turnips or anything that's that's overwintered, your kale starts to bolt. Chard bolts a little later than the brassicas do, but the collards are bolting. And so you kind of look at where those crops are at. Are they starting to stretch? And as soon as they start to stretch, we start ripping them out and replanting. And so in that winter slot space, we actually get 2 crops out of that. We double crop that. So we've been, reseeding some cut greens, radishes, early snap peas. First rounds of carrots and beets are up right now with the first true leaves. And as soon as those spring replants are up, the hoop house gets moved off of that slot. We pull it off and pull it on top of what will then be summer production. And kind of like to have those moved a couple weeks before we want to plant. We have been doing some tarping the last few years, which is actually accelerating the time that we need between moving the hoop house and replanting and planting the summer crop. But we move it on, close it up, hopefully get some sunny days to really warm it up, try and bring that soil temp up to those, mid 50s that your summer crops prefer. And then, get those summer crops in, sometimes late March, first, second week of April, kind of depending on the weather. And then those, we ride those summer crops all the way until frost kills them off, which would be maybe mid-October. Meanwhile, we have the winter slot that would have a spring cover crop on it, and then that gets mowed off, worked in, and stale bedded. We'll make beds and then either do a shallow cultivation or flame them off and be ready to seed our winter crops in a timely fashion. I know that can be kind of hard in a permanent hoop house, deciding when to take the summer crops out in order to plant the winter crops. But with these movables, I can keep the summer crops going as long as I want and put my winter crops in late August, early September, and have those ready to go for that deep winter production.
Right.
The other nice thing about having the movables is that I do like to let those winter crops get hardened off before I move the house on top of them. So they're out there in the wind. I like to let them get a pretty heavy frost on them. I won't cover them because I know that there's a potential for a 14 below night in the winter. And when they spend their whole life protected, they never really get that hardening off. And I feel like that really helps them thrive. Or I guess maybe not thrive, but be able to take those cold temperatures. So once they've gotten that heavy frost, then I'll go ahead and move a hoop house on top of them. And a lot of times that ends up being early November by the time we're making that move.
And with a 20 by 50 house on 2x2 metal skids, how are you moving that from one space to the next?
So I have a winch mounted on my truck. And this time of year, when I'm moving onto a slot that has no crop, it's a lot easier. I have a metal I-beam that I strap across the front of it, and 2 attachment points on that for a couple toe straps that kind of come into one pull point. So it's kind of triangulated there. So it's pulling each side evenly from one attachment point. And those I can move in a couple hours that way. In the fall, it's a little more complicated because you're pulling on top of full size kale and spinach that you've been harvesting off of, and so on those skids there, I'll tie a rope off to each skid, to each side of the hoop house, and the rope runs up along the side of the slot that I'm pulling on, and on each corner of the slot that I want to pull onto, I put in a T-post. Well, I started with one, and now I figured out 2 T-posts holds a lot better because it's a fair amount of weight pulling on those. So I'll put in 2 T-posts back to back and tie those together. And then there's a pulley attached on each corner, and that rope comes in, wraps around on those pulleys. It's just one rope that is attached to each skid, comes around on those pulleys, and then I attach up to that with the winch and can pull from one point. So that way it's pulling on each side of the house equally. That's the key. Keeping everything running straight that way. Exactly. Yeah, not twisting. I mean, you could hook up a truck or a tractor to each side and pull it that way. But that's kind of the way. That's the way I've come about it. That's a lot of this stuff has been developed for minimal labor to do it. That's something that I could do on my own. Were the mobile tunnels something that you guys had experience with before you started doing that on your own farm?
I wish.
Yeah. Nope, not at all. Yeah, and that's something we've talked about is, the farm that we worked on in Iowa was not a 4-season farm. It was a 3-season farm. And but us coming back, starting up the business, knowing that we didn't, that we just wanted to make a living off of it, knowing that we needed that year-round income. We just had to figure it out, and there's a lot of information out there. I feel like even more so now. I mean, we spent, 5 years starting to figure out plant dates, and then was it last year, all of a sudden I'm on Johnny's website and they have a nifty little calculator for putting in,
your zip code and
your zip code, and it spits out all these plant dates that lo and behold mostly line up with what we trialed and errored. Yeah, that's
Right. That's like you guys were too early to the game.
Sort of. I mean, I would argue that, we've had a lot of resources that make it a lot easier for us than, people twice our age.
Yeah, there is that.
Mm.
I'm not twice your age, but, just being a little bit older. So
I'll add on to that really quickly, just going back to kind of Indianapolis and the developing food scene. And so partly we started the farm with the having a 4-season production goal because of the sustained income. But also when we were moving back, there wasn't a winter farmers market that had been going, I think at that point, for 2 or 3 seasons. And actually Eli's dad was involved with that as he was managing another farm. And had been sort of helping to build that winter market. And he did really, really encourage us. He was like, hey, there's this winter market. There's an established outlet. You guys should really, he did really encourage us to kind of pursue that 4-season production because there was a growing outlet to be able to move the produce that we were going to grow in the winter. And so now I think we've been at that market 7 or 8 years, that winter market.
Do you feel like having the winter production has helped you to market your produce the rest of the year because you have that consistent presence?
Yeah, I would say it does. And we started out, our summer market that we started with was kind of in a suburb of Indianapolis. And so the winter market was right downtown. And that was really our only face-to-face interaction with customers in Indianapolis at that point. We were selling to restaurants. Maybe some people saw our names on menus here and there. But that winter market really let us interact with the buyers there.
There's a flagship market here. And what Eli's talking about is we were pretty calculated, I think, when we came back or when we were starting our farm in trying to choose our outlets wisely. So having the presence at the winter market was a goal because we knew that eventually we would want to apply for the kind of the flagship market that is in central Indianapolis. But when we first moved back, that's a high enough volume market that we were really nervous to try and apply to that market. We probably wouldn't have even gotten in if we had applied in our first year, but that was kind of our goal. And so we opted for our summer market. We kind of poked around and visited markets and chose to apply to a smaller market, still fairly close to the city, but in a suburb, but a smaller volume market to kind of cut our teeth and to get in and get going and figure out our production strategies, like get our succession plantings down. I think when we started our farm, we knew enough to know that we didn't know very much. And so we are both fairly risk averse. So farming is a funny career to be in for being fairly risk averse people. But we really just wanted to kind of cut our teeth slowly and start at that smaller market, develop our production techniques before we moved into that flagship summer market or before we applied to. And so the winter market presence, we were going to winter market, Chris, with like $200 worth of stuff, but we were dogged. We were like, we are going every single week, even if it's $200 worth of stuff. And we're going to sell out in 45 minutes or whatever, like we're going, like our faces are going to be there. And so I feel like we really did pound the pavement in that way in the beginning with the long game of getting into this bigger high volume summer market to be able, once we kind of cut our teeth and once we felt like we could meet the demand that we knew existed there.
And it does. that customer base does carry over. You end up with your hardcore farmers market shoppers. Some of these people we see more than our family. More than our family that lives close by. We see them every week. So it does help. It carries over, like you're saying.
Now, you said though that you don't market that winter produce to your restaurant accounts.
Yeah, the supply gets low, right? We do pack the coolers as full as we can in the late fall with storage crops, with your storage roots and brassicas, and then half an acre under plastic. It just doesn't meet the volume that both market and restaurants could take. And so we've so far have just stayed at market. We've tossed around the idea of cutting off market early and just continuing on with restaurants. But we kind of built our winter plan, our growing plan for the winter around what the market will eat and what people eat at the winter market. And so, after 7 years of planning, you got a pretty good grip on how much people are eating every week of what, which really lets you dial in your production. So there's, almost zero waste, that you're selling every bit of everything that you grow. Whereas the restaurants can be a little more volatile as to what they're taking every week.
And it's also a lifestyle decision. I mean, I can remember the farm that we worked at in Iowa, one of the sayings that I heard one of the farmers say was, I don't want to build an empire. Like I probably could have built this vegetable empire, but I just don't want to. It's not what I want to do. And we've really, that's an ongoing conversation between Eli and myself as well, is like, at what scale do we want to be at? Because I think to be able to meet those restaurants year round and meet that market year round, we would have to scale pretty seriously. And that means a lot of infrastructure changes. That would mean some equipment changes. More importantly, that would mean having way more employees. And it's just not something that we are sure we have wanted to do. It kind of protects our winter a little bit. We do go to market all year, but, it's just market and a lot of stuff is in storage, and it feels like it can be a little bit more autopilot, and it gives us just a smidgen of a rest time in the winter to not be, having coolers packed with 50,000 pounds of storage crops and, trying to find windows through the winter to cut greens to meet 2 different delivery days. So I think it's been a little bit of a conscious choice as well to just stay at market. We get a retail dollar. Like Eli said, we've pretty well nailed down like what that market can eat and can plan around that. And it protects our winter a little bit.
I think it is one of the real hardest things about winter production is balancing that production, because the demand, if you start servicing wholesale accounts, especially, but even at farmers market, the demand can just so far outstrip your production. Oh, yeah. And it's a lot harder to scale up the winter production than it is the summer production, which I suppose probably gives you guys kind of a niche too. Are there a lot of people doing winter production in your area?
Not a whole lot. No.
Not the full year and not at market.
Right.
We have pretty stiff competition at that market. Actually, that winter market is actually the first, the November and December markets are actually some of our lowest grossing markets of the whole year, because the competition, because we kind of funnel all of the growers into this one market, right? There's a few different summer markets, but then there's this one winter market. And so lots of people still have stuff in November and December. And so lots of people apply to come to the market. And so we actually do see a pretty big sales drop in November and December at that market. But we know, because we've been there for enough years now, that if we just hang on, we see a skyrocket in January, February, and March, basically until we sell out of stuff, because there's not, there's not much competition. So we definitely have kind of built, that is a niche that we have filled, is kind of like what I think of as the deep winter production, that January, February, and March.
And it depends on the year. This year we had a really, really hard cold spat that can be hard to manage in unheated tunnels. You got to be ready to uncover stuff on sunny days, and recover everything, and to be able to make it through those real cold times. And I think some people just didn't make it through that cold snap.
All right. With that, I think we're going to stop here, take a quick break, get a word from a couple of sponsors, and then we'll be right back with Genesis and Eli from Full Hand Farm in Noblesville, Indiana. Perennial support for the Farmer to Farmer podcast is provided by Vermont Compost Company, helping plants make sugar from sunshine since 1992. In the wild, where our crop plants' ancestors evolved their microbial partnerships, plants are provided with nutrients from the soil through the work of partner microbes that work with the plants. Wide-ranging roots reach an abundant supply of nutrients and microbes, even in less than ideal conditions. And now you've gone and stuck that seed in a little container, and it has to get everything that it needs right there in a few cubic centimeters of soil. By providing compost-based potting soils chock full of microbial partners and humus-bound nutrients, Vermont Compost ensures that your plants have what they need consistently. If they're not in the ground, your plants deserve to be in Vermont Compost potting soils, and you deserve the peace of mind of knowing that they are reaching their full potential while they're there. Makers of living media for organic growers since 1992. VermontCompost.com. Support for the podcast is also brought to you by Haas Tools. Haas Tools is the complete solution for all of your market farming tools and supplies. Keep rows weed-free with their time-tested American-made wheel hose and the best wheel hoe attachments. Their precision seeders have a proven seed plate design for planting a wide variety of seeds. And you can grow the best transplants with their heavy-duty PropTech seed trays and keep your crops healthy with their drip irrigation and fertilizer injection systems. Haas also provides a comprehensive selection of conventional and OMRI-certified pest control products at the most affordable prices. Free shipping and outstanding customer service. Shop online or request a free catalog at HaasTools.com. And we're back with Genesis and Eli from Full Hand Farm in Noblesville, Indiana. So before we went on break, we were talking about winter production and your mobile high tunnels, and you had mentioned the stationary high tunnels that you've got, but you've also got these Caterpillar type tunnels. Can you tell us a little bit more about those?
Yeah, sure. So that was something, I think in our second winter, I put one up, started playing around with it. And what it was cheap covered space for us. I mean, the 20 by 50s that we put up, single layer, were fairly cheap as far as hoop houses go. But for about a third of the cost, I could put up the same square footage, the same covered square footage in a Caterpillar tunnel. So how they're built is it's 20-foot PVC, 1.5 Schedule 40 PVC, and those have enough flex in them that 20-foot length will bend on its own. And I do about 12 feet wide, 11 to 12 feet wide, which gives about an 8-inch or 8-foot height at the center. And did a bow spacing every 4 feet. And those pipes just sit down on a rebar. So then I cut rebar, 2-foot long rebar, hammer it in the ground till there's 6 or 8 inches above ground, and insert one end of the pipe on that rebar and bend it over and put it on the other rebar. And then I did end up that first year, I didn't have a purlin, and that's a little hard to keep, it's almost impossible to have your bow stay in place that way. And so I put a purlin on, which really turned it into a 4-season structure for us. And then to hold it all together is literally baling twine. So in between each bow is another piece of rebar. It's the, 1/2 inch, 3/8 rebar that then I bent a hook into, and you put those in at an angle in between each bow, and then just run baling twine back and forth, kind of like a shoelace, all the way up and down that thing, and that tightens the plastic down and holds it together. And those we also move. So instead of moving the kit houses that we move, they have 3 slots in a line, and then these Caterpillar tunnels we move laterally. So there's 3 slots for those as well. But when you get ready to move, you cut the twine, pull the plastic down, pull one side of the hoop up, take rebar off of one side, move it over, and then you just swing the hoops around to cover the slot next to it. Yeah, and that's worked out really, really well for us. I mean, it's a fair amount of management, and because they are only 12 feet wide by 8 feet tall, that's a lot of edge space. They don't hold a lot of heat, but they serve perfectly well in our climate for a few different crops. Spinach will do well in there. Leeks over winter, no problem in there. And it's great to start out with. Like I said, cheap. I mean, the first one we put up, I think was cost about between $800 and $900. Materials have gone up quite a bit since then, but so you're talking under $1 square foot for a 4-season production space.
Wow.
I think now, maybe, I'm not sure, there's some companies that are putting together metal framed Caterpillar tunnels for probably about the same cost as I could source these materials now. But, PVC has a half-life of whatever, 1 million years. So right. now I'm stuck with them.
I'm a little bit surprised that these are sturdy enough to put up with the snow, because you guys have had quite a bit of snow down there this year, haven't you?
Yeah. Yep. And we've had a lot. I mean, was that 3 winters ago? There's 4 feet that running down the sides of these caterpillar tunnels, and I haven't ever removed it from the side. I think that part of the way that they stand up to snow and then big winds, storms like that, is almost like the difference between a big old oak tree and a willow tree, that they have that flex built in, and they can, I've been in there when it feels like that thing's going to blow over, but it's almost like that flex in the pipe allows it to take those heavy weather events and kind of pop back up into place.
How are you ventilating those?
Yeah, so that's manual. That's raising and lowering sides. And just I put a clamp on a PVC on the pipe on the bow to hold the plastic up. And again, it's kind of picking crops that can take it in there. Spinach, leeks. Yeah, kale can take it in there. And we are kind of moving away because of all the edge space. They don't hold heat real well. And we're putting up some bigger tunnels for this winter production. We are kind of moving towards using those more as like a early winter, pull it out, clean it out, and then reseed for the early spring. So we're not necessarily carrying over through the deep winter in there. The other thing that I've done with those that can be kind of hard is getting in and out of them. A lot of the designs you see are just what they call like a bread basket at the end to secure the plastic, which is a T-post at an angle, maybe 8 or 10 feet off the end. And you kind of bring all that plastic down to a bunch and wrap a ratchet strap around it and ratchet strap it tight. And then at our door end, what I've done was put again, T-posts, door width, a couple 3 feet apart, and strapped 2x4 to it, put wiggle wire on there, and just wiggle wired in an end wall. And then those 2x4s are strapped to the bows with some metal strapping. And so that lets me get in and out of the end easy.
Low tech, but giving you the access that makes it so you can actually get in and do the work.
Yep.
You or Genesis mentioned earlier that you have had a full-time employee on the farm for the last 3 years with you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How many employees do you guys have over the course of the year?
So currently we have one full-time year-round employee who, like we said, she's entering her 3rd full season with us. And she has been really critical to our success in the last couple of years. So we're really grateful to have had her with us consistently and for another year and potentially more. We'll hopefully. And then we also have one more full-time seasonal person who will come on actually, I think in about 2 weeks. We bring on our next full-time person who will be with us from early April until Christmas. And then we are also going to have one part-time person
year round.
Yeah. I guess now starting year round. Yeah. So we have Andrea, who's been with us. She's our full-time full season. And then we have another person who's going to be returning. She was full-time with us last year, full-time seasonal, and she's going to be moving to part-time year round. And then we'll bring on one more full-time seasonal, like April to December for this year. And then also hopefully some childcare, which will free up my labor. So Eli and I kind of like to think of ourselves as like 1.5 people, 1.5 farmers on the farm, between the farm and kids. So then a babysitter, I guess. I feel like that kind of counts in the employee section is childcare, to free up one of us, or to free up that extra labor from us.
And do you guys live on the farm?
We do. Yeah, we live on the farm.
Which is great because, work's right out the back door, but it's also hard because work's right out the back door.
Right. But I think in some ways it certainly makes the childcare easier.
Oh,
big time.
Yeah. I mean, our boy's 3.5, and he spends a lot of time out with us and out with the crew. And, we're set back from the road. He has a lot of freedom. He can come and find us where we're at. And, so we get a lot of work done with the kids.
And it is nice the way that you guys are, looking at a map of your farm, set back from the road so far that the kid, you really can let a kid roam in that sort of situation.
You can, yeah. And it wasn't necessarily something we thought when we found this place. Actually, one of the main things we thought was protection from drift.
Yeah.
You know, and then of course it found its way through the one hole in the property.
Getting a year-round employee and keeping somebody like that employed is a pretty big step for any business. And I'm curious how you guys made that leap so early in the development of your farm. If she's been with you for 3 years now, you know, that you guys did that when you were still a pretty young farming operation.
We did.
Yeah.
I was going to say, and it's mostly a credit to Andrea.
So we did move to employing people on the farm much faster than we anticipated that we would, mostly because we got pregnant faster than we thought that we might. And so once it became clear that we were not both going to be able to be fully committing ourselves 100% of the time to the farm, we realized that, you know, we needed to get help and we needed to scale and all of that. So I would say that the growth of our family has definitely dictated the growth of the business. Just by necessity of, you know, children needing their basic needs met every single day. I mean, who knew?
Well, and I'll jump in and say not wanting to miss them growing up as well, right? So, I mean, when you start hiring people, your net goes down, but we quit at 5. You know, we have dinner together as a family every night. You know, we have lunch together, we have breakfast together. I mean, it's not, the farm is not, we're not letting the farm eat up all our time. We're not missing this window with the kids, which has spurred the hiring, you know.
And I think is also due to having a really excellent full-time person with us who is able to, really shoulder a lot of the responsibilities. She knows a lot about the farm, and she can really carry a lot of the responsibility and be a crew leader, be a harvest leader, be a pack shed leader. I mean, she really is able to kind of dip in and out of all and change her hats of management on the farm almost as well as Eli or myself. And we just knew as soon as that we were going to have to figure out how to do that. And I think we built slowly. You know, it's not like we started. She's gotten a raise every year, and we kind of always like worked with her to figure out like, how's it going? What do you want to be learning about more this year? And trying to just keep the deal as sweet as possible. And I guess, you know, financially, yeah, that is a big responsibility, but we've figured out how to make it work.
I feel like one of the biggest advantages of doing winter production or anything that you can do to seriously extend the season is that ability to keep somebody employed year round or close to year round so that you don't lose them from year to year.
Big time. Yeah. And, you know, hiring can be a little bit of a struggle, and we're kind of running into that. We're a little rural. We're 45 minutes north of Indianapolis, where a lot of the labor, some of the labor that we've hired has come from, which is a lot of, you know, that's a big drive, depending where they live. And so, you know, keeping somebody year round is key. I will say Andrea now lives on farm. She owns a house in a town, maybe half an hour from here. And that drive started feeling like a lot for her, and she now rents that house out. And when we bought the property, there was an old trailer on site, no VIN, no plates, no nothing, no story. And we gave that to her, and she built a little tiny house on it, and is now living on site as well.
So one of the disadvantages of having somebody who sticks around for 3 years and works for you year round is that they do have a tendency at some point to move on. Mm-hmm. Have you guys thought about how you're going to manage that when that transition comes?
That's a good question. I mean, that'll be hard, and we'll be okay though. I mean, she's been with us, and it's pretty critical having her through kind of the fog of early
babies.
Parenthood. Yes. You know, and as you come out of that fog, you start to have the capacity for a little more. And and just starting to look forward to that as far as how to bring in talent. I mean, we lucked out on having such a talented person kind of find us and come onto our farm. And like I said, living rurally, I'm not sure that we might not have to advertise nationally to try and find somebody as committed as we've found. So yeah, I'm not sure. It's hard to think about replacing that.
I think it's really interesting that you guys, when you started your farm, didn't jump in and start a CSA, because that seems to be what most young vegetable farmers do these days when they're getting a farm off the ground. Why didn't you start a CSA?
Yeah, that is a good question. And we worked on a CSA farm. We worked on that was where we got trained up, was on a farm that was, 95% CSA. And when we were moving back to Indianapolis, just to farm, or to knowing that Indianapolis was going to be our market, we heard pretty quickly, visiting around to farmers markets and kind of introducing ourselves and talking to growers who were here. Indianapolis is a challenging CSA climate. We don't have the culture of CSA in Indiana the way that a lot of other states do. And I'm not sure why that is, but it just doesn't exist here. We don't have that sort of deep history of CSA like New York or Wisconsin or, a lot of other places have. In addition, so I think culturally in Indianapolis, which is a big city, it's just that people don't know about it. And, if they do, then maybe they just don't care, just for whatever reason. But another factor of that is that, the home delivery services. We had a local grocery home delivery service that had started up maybe the year that we moved back or the year before. And so we were talking to one or two of the growers that did have a CSA at that time, and they were really saying how hard it was, how much that competition was hurting their CSA. And so we had that kind of in the back of our minds. We thought that we would get our growing chops under us and add a CSA eventually. I think initially in the first year, we decided not to do a CSA because we were so nervous about being able to supply a full, rich experience to a shareholder as we were learning how to be farmers.
And I'll tag on to that is that, working in Iowa on that farm and visiting some other farms and talking to other young growers or growers who'd been at it for decades, one thing we'd heard was, a lot of young growers start out in CSA and drop the ball and put a bad taste in people's mouth. And we didn't want to be part of that. And we didn't want to commit to something that we weren't going to be able to follow through on. And so the CSA was maybe in our business plan for 3 to 4 years down the road, but we didn't want to make the commitment before we had at least one leg underneath us.
And so, but by the time we got 3 or 4 years down the road, the CSA climate, I think, is still a little bit challenging here. And the restaurant demand was way higher than we thought it was going to be. We kind of figured we would do farmers market and that would be an important avenue of revenue for us. But I think we really underestimated, in writing our business plan and kind of imagining how we were going to make a living, we really underestimated what kind of, just what kind of business we were going to be able to do with restaurants. And that just picked up, that just took off. And so by the time we had been growing for 3 or 4 years, we had established market and we were starting to have restaurants that we'd worked with every year. I started, I've actually never called a restaurant to see if they want my produce. We field calls every year. About this year, they call me. and it's been like that since the beginning. So we've just kind of gone with it, which is partly why I don't have a website. We were talking about that before we started recording. You were like, you guys don't even have a website. And it's because we haven't really had to work very hard at marketing, for better or for worse. That's not a skill set that we've really had to put a lot of energy into so far. I'm not saying that couldn't change. That could very well change, but so far we haven't needed to.
So tell me a little bit more about how you do your restaurant sales, on a weekly basis. How are you managing getting the information out to your customers about what you have available and getting those orders back in and then getting that stuff packed up and delivered?
Sure. So usually early May is when we start picking up. I usually send out a price sheet for the year and kind of a welcome, hello, it's a new season email to the chefs that we have worked with in the past. Coming up now, mid-April, I'll try and send that email. And so that goes out mid-April, and I kind of make sure everybody's cell phone numbers are still the same, let them know sort of how things are looking to get started in the spring. And once we're up, and that's pretty much the only email that I send. Once we get up and going for the season, everything is by text message. So we do a field walk on, Sunday afternoon or early Monday morning, and we kind of make our, I guess, fresh sheet is what you would call it, get our list of what we have available. And so Monday morning by I like to have the list out no later than 10 a.m. I'm sending chefs, I'm sending them a text message that says, hey, here's what we have for the week. I'll try and include a little something about the farm just so that there's a little bit of they understand what's going on or, crops that are coming on or whatever, but just like, a nice friendly hello and then a list of what we have available. And I like for chefs to get back to me by Monday night. I usually say like Tuesday midday is the absolute deadline, but ideally we'd like to have our orders in by Monday evening. Those get compiled. We have a big whiteboard in our pack shed that down the left side it's like a magnetic whiteboard. And so, you can get this little magnetic like tape. And so you can, use a dry erase marker and write the name of the restaurant on it because it changes from week to week who's ordering. And so it's just a big grid. And so along the left-hand side, we have our restaurants that have ordered in the order. And like I put them up there in the order in which the orders come in so that if we end up running shy on something, we start from the top and work down to the bottom. And then across the top of the grid is the crops that were included on the list. And so on that board in the grid, you just line up, you have like, okay, Bluebeard ordered, 5 pounds of spinach and 20 pounds of carrots and, a box of heirloom tomatoes. And so their specific order goes in that grid mark. And then down at the bottom, we just do a tally of the total harvest quantities. So that's all ready to go on Tuesday morning when we have our full crew here. And so that list gets translated to a harvest list, another whiteboard that's got, each field, where the crop is located, and the total harvest quantity that we need. And so the crew comes in, they see that total harvest list, they're off to the races, getting our total quantities. All that stuff comes back in Tuesday morning, mostly. And then we spend Tuesday afternoon washing and packing. And so once the total crop the total harvest is washed, then there's somebody on the crew who's looking at that board and breaking things down by specific order, going into crates that are labeled, and like each restaurant has a stack of crates in the cooler. And those get organized in the cooler in the order, like in the delivery order, if that makes sense, so that then when we're loading the van for deliveries on Wednesday afternoon, things can, you're not shuffling a bunch of stuff around. It's like, okay, the last restaurant delivery is going in the van first, and then you just like work your way around clockwise or counterclockwise or however it is organized. So it's Tuesday, and then Wednesday morning too is also usually a little bit of if late orders always come in. So there's also Wednesday morning to kind of finish up or get little bits of this or that. And then restaurants go out the door Wednesday afternoon. And we feel pretty lucky. So we're trying to leave the farm by noon or 1 o'clock. And I mean, we're sometimes doing 18 or 20 drops, and we can be door to door, like leaving the farm and home to the farm in about 4 or 4.5 hours.
Oh, wow.
Which feels pretty efficient.
Yeah. That's really great. I mean, I guess, that's one of those real advantages of being 45 minutes from your marketplace.
Exactly.
Yeah. When we were looking for property, I mean, we started off, we drew a 50-mile circle around Indianapolis, knowing that Indy was going to be our market. And then we drove 50 miles out and realized that can be really far. And we tightened that circle up. And it matters, the size of the road that you're close to. I mean, you can be 20 miles from town, but 20 miles from the interstate, and it take twice as long as being 40 miles from town, but 10 minutes from the interstate. I mean, that was something that we looked at when we were looking for property was how close can we be without competing with development prices.
I will say also to tag on to, because it kind of ties into the restaurant stuff. I've worked in restaurants since I was 16, and that was also part of needing a property that was close enough to town because I kept my restaurant job. until actually I kept my restaurant job until my son was born. And so, farm work by day, restaurant by night. But that also really helped. I think that has helped us develop our restaurant business as well. So I was working in a high-end restaurant in Indianapolis as we were getting the farm off the ground. That's what capitalized a lot of it, was tip money from working at a fine dining restaurant. But what that also did was really, it introduced us, it introduced me to the chef community in Indianapolis, which is really similar to the farm community in Indiana in that it's very small but very high quality. And so it's, birds of a feather find each other very easily in these states that where what we're doing is maybe more common in other places, but I think it can be easier to connect with your people in a place where there's not as much of it going on. And so that's the same case in the restaurant scene, where once we kind of got started, we first started selling to the restaurant that I was working at, and then word just kind of started getting out, and people were like, oh, you wait tables here, but you also have a farm. Like, cool. Can I get on your list? And that was really helpful to building that was an unintended consequence of having the night job to fund the startup of the farm.
And that also gave us a different kind of relationship with the chef that Genesis was working for. He was very candid in telling us how he liked our crops or did not like the crop. And it also, it kind of gave us an idea of how this stuff was getting used, which is really important. And I'll ask that sometimes of chefs. They say they want something. It's like, okay, well, how is this being cooked, which will directly relate to how we're harvesting it and or processing it. Really having an understanding of that finished product lets you know a good place to start.
When you were talking about the deliveries, you mentioned that you were organizing things in crates in the cooler for those deliveries. Mm-hmm. Are you delivering in crates?
No, it's bagged up. It's mostly just in plastic bags. We've stayed away from the wax boxes. I guess mostly as a cost thing, to try to keep the costs down.
Because our restaurants, sorry to interrupt, but our restaurants they won't save them for us. They're like too busy. They don't want to save our wax boxes. So
yeah, so it's all bagged up and then put in crates. Just to keep anything from getting smushed and keep it organized. It is a little bit of a pain. It would be nice to just wheel a dolly load of wax boxes in and drop. But so far it's worked for us.
So are you guys doing standard packs for the restaurants? I mean, do you offer carrots in you can order 5 pounds, 10 pounds, or 15 pounds? Or is it more just like, how many carrots do you guys want this week?
Yeah, it's the latter. It's like, how many carrots do you want this week? And actually just this year, which can be, it's both nice and annoying. It's nice because we don't always have the production. It doesn't always feel like we just have endless supply of our weekly list to offer these restaurants. So if somebody wants 3 pounds of carrots, then that might mean that somebody who wants 20 pounds of carrots might actually get their full order. Like, some of these orders are getting filled very tightly, or we're pinching pounds here and there to give everybody most of what they want, but not the full order of what they want. And then it's a flurry of text messages to let everybody know. It can be, managing the details of that can be a little bit hectic on delivery day. But it works for us. And I think it works for our chefs. I mean, I think our chefs like having that kind of flexibility. We haven't really had a big problem with, teeny tiny orders. Just this last year, it kind of popped up enough times that we were like, I don't really think a $10 order is really worth it to make a stop. So part of this year's email, kind of welcome to the season email, I think, is going to be instituting a minimum order, which we haven't ever done before. But I do think that makes sense moving forward.
And how many times a week are you taking orders and delivering to your restaurants?
Once. We did, and so, take orders Monday, deliver Wednesday, because then the rest of our week is focused on getting market harvested, packed up, and out the door. We did a twice a week delivery for one season, maybe 4 years ago, and it was just too much to try and get market out the door as well. And I mean, there's a lot of interest in a twice a week delivery, right? Because then they don't have to have the storage. They get that bump later in the week for the weekend rush. But we've just stuck at the once a week. Because we don't want to cut market off, right? We don't want to compromise our market. We want to serve both outlets equally well. We don't want to put all our eggs in one basket.
Right. And then you mentioned that you're not reaching out to restaurants to market to them, that you have restaurants coming to you. Are you screening those restaurants and deciding which ones you're going to take on, or is it pretty much anybody that calls can order product from Full Hand Farm?
Almost, but not really. I mean, I guess we screen in the sense that we have a really streamlined delivery route. I mean, it's just about kind of the nature of how the city has set up and how these restaurants are distributed throughout the city. In that right now, we head into town, we start, in a little neighborhood just south of downtown. And then there's a main artery that we're taking 5 miles. It's probably 8 miles. It's probably 8 miles from downtown up to our last stop, but we're not veering more than 4 blocks in either direction from that main artery right now. And so we have been picky in the sense of if somebody's calling and they're 20 minutes on the other side of town on the Beltway, we're probably not going to add that delivery. Just because it's so far outside of our very streamlined delivery route right now, just by the graces of how these restaurants have peppered themselves throughout the city. So that's really the only screening that we're doing right now, is that we're hesitant to take on anything that's going to add 40 minutes to our route for a minimal bump in revenue.
All right, with that, we're going to turn here to our lightning round, but first we're going to get a quick word from one more sponsor. Today's lightning round is brought to you by Local Food Marketplace. Are you trying to scale up without the right systems? Instead of juggling email and text orders, spreadsheets for harvest packing and delivery, and a separate invoicing system, Local Food Marketplace's software platform will help your farm automate these tasks and decrease errors with its fully integrated system for online orders, inventory management, order packing, invoicing, and payment processing. Easily configure the system for managing multiple sales channels, customer types, price levels, and delivery routes. The platform also offers lot number traceability and an option to collaboratively sell products with other producers. Contact them via their website, localfoodmarketplace.com, to schedule a free consultation on how Local Food Marketplace can help you efficiently manage customer orders from the pack house to your customer's doorstep. Eli, what's your favorite tool on the farm?
That is a good question. There's a lot. I knew we kind of knew this lightning round was coming, being listeners of the show. And, I thought, maybe our movable tunnels, kind of being able to play with those. When we brought a flame weeder in on the farm, that was kind of a game changer. But probably the most useful to me is our crop plan. We've done a really good job over the years of keeping pretty meticulous records on plant dates, harvest dates, quantities, and it's all in an Excel spreadsheet. And so we do all our thinking, around Christmas, New Year's, early January, and kind of plan out the whole season and get that all mapped out and dealt with. So then, as spring hits and the season starts, then we have it all right there in front of us to change when it rains. And, but I'd say that's probably my most useful tool on the farm.
Genesis, do you have a favorite tool on the farm?
Yes. Before I had kids, I think it was the wheel hoe. I loved just like the rhythm of it and, the efficiency of it. But since I've had kids, I think that my favorite tool on the farm is the long range baby monitor.
And that's actually how we've vetted monitors. You pour over the megahertz of the antenna.
That's the primary feature for you guys.
And I've still gone through like 5 of them because I put them in my back pocket and snap the antenna, but it's a useful tool.
And worth the replacement cost.
Exactly. And I figure it's a business expense.
That's right. Genesis, what would surprise people about you?
What do you think, Eli?
Oh, I don't know. Your ability to throw down on whatever, whether it be pulling a rear tire off the tractor or, cold calling markets or farmers, different farms to go visit. I don't know if that's a very good answer.
I actually love that answer. And it's funny because you say that's what would surprise people, but it's also like, when I met you guys, I don't know how many years ago in Indianapolis at the Indiana Small Farms Conference, that was totally the impression that I had. All right. Genesis, what's Eli's farming superpower?
I think Eli's farming superpower is his ability to be good-naturedly steadfast. Eli is steady, he is focused, and he is in a good mood all the while. And it's just, I think it's a really wonderful quality that keeps our farm humming along, given lots of surprises that get thrown our way season in and season out.
Genesis, if you could go back in time and tell your beginning farmer self one thing, what would it be?
Knowing what I know now, I think I would go back in time and tell my beginning farmer self to work on a 4-season farm before we started a 4-season farm. There's a lot of value in learning all the lessons yourself. But I think in another sense, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. So yeah, I think I would tell my beginning farmer self to work on another 4-season farm, or maybe just work on at least one other farming operation before we started our own.
And Eli, how about you? If you could go back in time and tell your beginning farmer self one thing, what would it be?
I put some thought into this one as well, and it's I might have to say something that was told to my beginning farmer self, and that I continually do still tell myself. We visited a farm in Iowa. I can't remember the guy's name. Small Potatoes Farm was the name of it. And he said, if you can't manage 1 acre well, how are you going to manage 2 or 3 or 23? And so that's kind of how we've metered our growth, right? You manage 1 acre, figure it out, bump up a little bit. You only bump up as much as you're comfortable, right? You stretch yourself just as far as you think you can. And I still have to listen. I still have to listen to that in the back of my head.
Eli and Genesis, thank you so much for being part of the Farmer to Farmer podcast today.
Sure. Thanks for reaching out, and thanks for all the work you've done, Chris. I mean, like I said, we've heard you talk a lot throughout the years, and you're a great resource for all of us.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Eli.
thank you. We really appreciate the invitation.
All right, so wrapping things up here, I'll say again that this is episode 167 of the Farmer to Farmer podcast. You can find the notes for this show at farmertofarmerpodcast.com by looking on the episodes page or just searching for Full Hand. That's FULLHAND. The transcript for this episode is brought to you by Earth Tools, offering the most complete selection of walk-behind farming equipment and high-quality garden tools in North America, and by Osborne Quality Seeds, a dedicated partner for growers. Visit osborneseed.com for high-quality seed, industry-leading customer service, and fast order fulfillment. Additional funding for transcripts is provided by North Central SARE, providing grants and education to advance innovations in sustainable agriculture. You can get the show notes for every Farmer to Farmer podcast right in your inbox by signing up for my email newsletter at farmertofarmerpodcast.com. Also, you can head on over to iTunes and leave us a review if you enjoy the show, or talk to us in the show notes, or tell your friends on Facebook. We're at Purple Pitchfork on Facebook. And hey, when you talk to our sponsors, please let them know how much you appreciate their support of a resource that you value. You can support the show directly by going to farmertofarmerpodcast.com/donate. I'm working to make the best farming podcast in the world, and you can help. And speaking of help, I'd like to start a tractor today in thanks to Teddy Bolkus and Delaney Trusty for their support of the show through the Patreon website, where they're patrons who have given a certain dollar amount every month and pledged their support for the show into the future. Finally, please let me know who you would like to hear from on the show through the suggestions form at farmertofarmerpodcast.com, and I will do my best to get them on the show. Thank you for listening. Be safe out there. and keep the tractor running.